MMORPG. A question asked by scholars and philosophers alike. How do we define this genre? This question is actually so volatile and divisive in the MMO community, it really needs its own series of videos split over several specific topics. So let's do that. Let's dive into this fascinating genre and really ask, what is it? From the acronym MMORPG itself to the games we know as MMORPGs to the games we describe as MMOs which aren't quite. What are we actually talking about? Quick note, this video is kindly sponsored by Guild Wars 2, which is definitely an MMORPG, unlike Guild Wars 1, which is an online RPG. What's the difference? Let's find out. As always, thank you to the supporters on Patreon who allow me to keep making these videos. Several YouTubers far smarter than me have already made excellent videos examining what an MMORPG even is, from breaking down the acronym to analysing games that we would commonly describe as MMORPGs. And while we've made some advancement into working out what the hell this genre even is, there's only two things we really, as a community, agree on. One, Steam doesn't know what an MMO is, because the MMO tagged games are always quite strange. And two, an MMO is a game in which there is a fishing minigame. That's about as far as we've got. As for why fishing specifically, Adam Millard has a brilliant video on why so many games turn to that exact thing. If you're interested in game design, go and give it a watch, I'll link it in the description. But beyond fishing, what is an MMORPG? Well, the acronym stands for Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. So I wanted to break this down and examine each bit individually. How massive? Multiplayer in what context? Is it always online? And what
do you fish in Lost Ark 2?
What level of freedom is given within the RPG aspect? Some games we would know as MMORPGs aren't necessarily massive. Some of them don't even require multiplayer. Some of them aren't even always online. But while I was writing a brief outline of all the important points I wanted to cover in this rather long topic, I saw this tweet by Mrs. Sticks, retweeted by MMOByte. The original tweet reads, "Why do we like MMOs so much if we keep playing it like a single player?" And MMOByte replies, "It's such an unusual direction to take the genre, making it solo-friendly, less massively multiplayer. I think soon we're going to see MMORPGs simply become online roleplay."
Okay, so there's a big difference already. Because if you can solo in an MMO, you still have an impact on the economy. You still have an impact on the open world and everything. So you're still a part of an MMO. In a massively multiplayer sense, just you're playing solo. So it's still massively multiplayer. It's just that you're playing in that massively multiplayer environment alone, right? I think that's different.
Playing games.
And yeah,
the interesting aspect of that reply is he left out the MM, massively multiplayer. So if encouraging solo play of a multiplayer game is enough to justify changing the acronym, then the multiplayer element must be a core design pillar of this genre. This seemed like a good place to start exploring. I'm not saying MMOByte is right or wrong in his reply, it's just a solid starting point. Because is it a different direction? Or has this aspect actually always been there? Before we look at whether older MMORPGs even allowed solo play, never mind encouraged it, we have to ask a simple question of why would someone want to play solo? MMORPG, massively multiplayer, a genre which prides itself on giving you the ability to play with millions of other people, players from all around the globe. Why would anyone choose to take on a multiplayer adventure on their own? Well, the answer's pretty simple. It's because you want to. The gameplay of an MMO is usually...
What? What a profound take, Josh. Wow. No.
A fantastical adventure, broken down by slow, monotonous grinding between the exciting bits, leveling skills or killing the same enemy again and again. And while it can be nice to have company during these long stretches of repetition, it's not always wanted. People enjoy doing lots of things by themselves. I like real-time strategy games, but I also like playing against the computer. I like Unreal Tournament against bots. I like painting Warhammer by myself. All things which are considered boring and repetitive by some, and which could likely be improved by sharing the experience with someone else. But
if you have a mount like that, how hard, like, is this like the base mount of Final Fantasy? Whenever I see someone on a mech mount that looks like a fucking, I don't know. Okay, that's a story mount. Okay, that makes more sense.
Here's the thing.
It looks so ugly.
I do share those experiences with other people when I want to. If I want to play multiplayer games with other people, I will. Or if I want to paint models with other people, I will. The important thing is, I have the choice. When someone says they enjoy playing MMO games solo, it doesn't necessarily mean they avoid all human contact at all costs. It usually means they prefer to enjoy the game either alone or with a closer, more specific group of friends, because those friends enjoy the game in the same way they do, either focusing on the lore, the mechanics, or min-maxing. It's important to not simply have a large player base for the sake of having a large player base if you don't actually interact with them. A fun play group who enhance the game for you is worth far more. Playing an MMO can often be a relaxing hobby, while constant interaction with people can be a draining hobby in both the real world and the virtual. Sometimes you just want to come home from a day surrounded by people and go and exist in a fantastical virtual world by yourself. Yes, there are other people also in this world, but that's actually a calming element of it.
It's like an important element, because if you just, that's why I don't play normal RPGs, right? I would consider myself often a solo player, but I enjoy that you're a part of the world, and a world of a lot of people, right? So your actions are relevant to everyone around you as well. So, you know, I think that's not really a difficult thing to wrap your head around. Yeah, it's just better. It's just better if then also your progress matters more, right? Because you are in the context of other people too.
Because you don't need to spend energy interacting with them, it's just nice to have them there. Other players are acting as free-thinking, feeling background characters, framing your own adventure, lending the world weight and reality. Knowing that your actions affect a living world without the emotional effort of constantly needing to be social in that world is enjoyable. Playing an MMO with a group means you will have certain expectations, requirements of you. You'll have to keep up with any chat that's going on or play your class. You have a role to fulfill and you can't let your team down, and that's pressure. Sometimes you want to experience the gameplay of an MMORPG, the world, the music, the characters, the lore, the story, or the mechanics, without that pressure of feeling like you need to fulfill a role in a team. You can have the game on in the background.
You know what he does really well? He probably reads off of a script, right? But it doesn't look like he does. So he does that pretty well.
Watch a film, watch Netflix, read a book, or even do some work, or most likely what you're doing right now, which is watching some YouTube videos. It can be nice to experience the MMORPG without the pressure that being in a team puts on you. Whatever your favourite MMO is, it can always be played in the background. And if you aren't playing an MMO right now, consider downloading this video's sponsor, Guild Wars 2. This is the second video of mine that Guild Wars 2 have sponsored quite recently, which makes me think the management team have finally found the marketing team hiding in a long-forgotten office somewhere or just playing jumping puzzles all day and are demanding they actually start doing their job and sponsoring some YouTubers or something.
I also still think Guild Wars has a lot of
since it launched all the way back in 2012, and it's been one of the few MMOs I've installed on every PC I've had since then, and finally, after like 5 years of coming soon, it's actually released on Steam. They've even released 2 very positive reviews. The latest expansion, End of Dragons, brings a ton of new content without invalidating the previous expansions, Heart of Thorns and Path of Fire, but you don't need to buy anything to try the game. There is a massive free trial. The base game is free with no time limit, and if you do like it, it is a one-time purchase with no monthly sub. Once you own Guild Wars 2, you own it. And given the amount of hours I've got out of this game, Guild Wars 2 is probably the best value money I've ever spent on a video game. To celebrate the Steam launch, there's a link in the description. You can sign up, get a code, and grab the game on Steam, and then if you want, you can redeem the code.
But there are some rumors right now that there might be a Guild Wars 3 eventually, that they're starting development for that at the moment.
For an experience boost pack, some karma boosting, and a 10-slot bag with a mini pet. This all saves you about $10, and it's free, so there's no reason not to. There's a new player guide on the website, although the in-game tutorial is actually really good. There's great build variety in the classes, and the mount system is so good it is now the standard by which other games are to be judged.
For its time.
Regular viewers will know that I don't accept sponsorships unless I can personally vouch for the product, and honestly, Guild Wars 2 is just a really good MMORPG game with a great deal of content that every player should at least try. Right, back to talking about solo MMO gameplay. When I play MMORPGs on stream, I often have people following me around, but I would still consider myself a mostly solo player, despite the fact I enjoy dungeons and team-based events. So how does that work?
I mean, Lost Ark, I think... One thing I'm missing of Lost Ark... First of all, I prefer third person. I think third person is better for MMOs. But I also think one thing that's missing from Lost Ark, fundamentally, is having so few abilities. And most abilities aren't very expressive. So, like, if I click Moonlight Sonic, that's what it's gonna do. It's just gonna do it, right? You click the button, you hold it down, that's it. There's nothing else. I wish games would be a little... I think BDO did that pretty well with how the game felt combat-wise. If you would get BDO combat and add a little bit more to it and polish it a little bit more, and then you add the Lost Ark animations and Lost Ark, like, attention to detail, that would be better, I think.
Well, the simple fact that I'm playing with people doesn't mean that I'm interacting with them or connecting to them in any meaningful way. And I think it's this lack of meaningful connection to other people that people often confuse with the lack of multiplayer elements. There is a long-held belief that newer MMORPGs are pushing people more towards solo-focused play. You exist in a world with other people, but you don't necessarily interact with them. I've even made a video called Social to Solo, where I look at how the design philosophy has changed over the years, allowing people to experience the games solo. But were older games actually more cooperative? Did they demand more teamwork, or do people simply remember them as more cooperative because hanging out with people...
I mean, they were more cooperative because you needed to do that, right? You didn't have a choice. You didn't understand the game or the games enough. So that's what happened. You know, you needed to band together for dungeons and some open world quests that were too hard otherwise. You could still solo most open world stuff, but it was just way easier in a group, you know?
Online was novel for the time, so people did that aspect more. The massively multiplayer part is a major point of contention within the MMORPG community. What is massive? It's not quantified, it's far too vague. From games designers to players, we don't know what you want massive to count as.
Everything,
1,000 players? 10,000? 100,000? 1 million? Or 10 million? If you count 1 million players as massive,
like
can I have 1 million people on my friends list? Could I have an ignore list 1 million players long? Will there ever be a zone where you could actually have 1 million players all at one time? Could you even interact with 1 million if you wanted to? If you have a number higher than the amount of players a single player could realistically be expected to engage with at any one time, is that enhancing your player base, or is that simply padding it out? How big is massive, and how big does massive need to be for the players to actually notice? Old School RuneScape has hundreds of thousands of active players, so it could rightfully be called a massively successful game, and it's definitely multiplayer, but each individual world holds up to 2,000 people, meaning even if you had every single player on a given world in the same space, you'd only be interacting with a tiny fraction of the total player base at any one time. And you wouldn't likely be able to form any meaningful connection with any one of them in the mass of players. The Elder Scrolls Online has its mega servers, shards, all existing simultaneously, but instead of showing you every player around you, it has phasing, where you'll always see enough players for the world to feel full, but never so many you feel over.
I still think that's an interesting discussion between, do you rather have servers that you can't swap between, or like rarely, or would you rather have channels that you can still swap between, but it's like RuneScape, I guess. If you have 100 people in your vicinity, it doesn't matter if it's 10% of the total pop or 0.0001, I guess. Where you can play with anyone. I also think servers are kind of outdated, but I also think they offer something unique. So I don't know. I think channels are probably the future though.
Overwhelmed, which makes it easier to form connections, but is this still massive if you're experiencing a curated version of the player base? Is the word massive more about the reality of who you interact with in the game, or the greater community around the game? If the majority of your game is dungeons and raids with say 5, 10 or 25 people in a raid, are you actually interacting with 25 people? Or are you interacting with...
The way WoW does it, I think, is horrible. I think that you're shard, that you can't see which shard you're on, and you can't really pinpoint on which one you want to go to. I think that's bad. I think channels like BDO does it is way better, where you can choose which one you're gonna go to, and you can just swap around every 15 minutes or whatever.
Thousands of people in groups of 25 at a
And
time.
WoW has
Or are you
literal
interacting
servers
at
as well.
all?
WoW
Does a
is
dungeon
both.
run with no connection to another player even count as interaction? You're as close to a random player in a random group as you are to a stranger you walk alongside while walking through town, or someone sat 2 seats behind you on a roller coaster. Just because you're going on the same journey doesn't mean you're taking the journey together. MMOs are often broken down into the styles of theme park versus sandbox. Would going to a theme park alone count as interacting with everyone at the park? Could you say you've had a multiplayer experience? And should anyone be stopped
I think the
having that
RuneScape
experience
does it is pretty
if
nice.
they are alone? Most often, it's less about the potential of who you could interact with and more about who you actually do interact with. A small group of 5 to 10 friends talking and adventuring together will feel a lot more social and connected than 500 players silently running the same dungeon again and again. Quality really does beat quantity when it comes to meaningful human interactions. Psychologists have even studied how many people we can actually feel connected to. It's known as Dunbar's number, and it's around 150 people. Any more and you simply cannot connect to them on an individual personal level, meaning even if your game does have 1 billion players, only 150 of them may be close enough to you to be meaningful to play with. The massively part of the acronym can sometimes be a bit of a false selling point. Having 1 million players means nothing unless you're required to interact with all 1 million, and if you are, that's overwhelming. Having enough players to make your game feel fleshed out and full, but not too many to
I mean, that's true and all, but I think that's not really what the reality is. The reality is people want to be investing their time into games that feel like they're relevant. So while they're not interacting with 1 million people, having 1 million people play it on social media, on Reddit, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, that makes people more invested. And also they think about longevity more than, yeah, that means that they can invest their time and it doesn't feel like they're just, you know, spending time in a game that will die. Yeah, so I think what he's saying makes sense, but also there's more to it. I think people just don't want to invest time into things that they think they will die soon, and especially MMO players, right? Like as an MMO player, you want to play long term, and if the game is dead, then you won't feel as motivated to play, although you're not interacting for anyone. No, I do want them all to be gone, not really. Yeah, I don't know. You want to play a game that everybody's talking about and has bright future, yeah. It's like being a part of a bigger community.
overwhelm while still maintaining those personal
Although you're not
relationships
individually
is a good
interacting
amount
with
to aim
them.
for. The potential for connections is massive, but until the player chooses to realize those potentials and actually interact with and connect to people, it remains potential, not realized. Many modern MMO games are designed so you don't need to interact with people, but you can if you choose to. The potential is there, but it's not required. It's this change in design, this facilitation of solo play in a genre which prides itself on multiplayer aspects that many people point to as the downfall of the genre. They say MMORPGs used to be games which needed player interaction and so forced those connections between players, resulting in long-term friendships, guilds or clans. And now taking that away, the genre is weaker for it. And this is of course subjective, but I decided maybe I should go back and play an older MMORPG and see how that handles the facilitation of solo play to gather some information on this strange phenomenon. Now, I've played a lot of MMORPGs, some for thousands of hours, some for only a few, but most of them have allowed me to have a pretty decent solo experience, teaming up with people when I wanted to, playing alone when I wanted to, and I value this. MMORPGs often advertise themselves by saying you can have your own adventure, especially the sandbox games. Live your own way, forge your own path, and if I want that path to be alone who occasionally teams up, that should be something I can choose to do. If
Yeah.
you look at many of the modern MMO offerings, you'll see solo play is not only viable, but often encouraged. Old school RuneScape and RuneScape 3 both have their Iron Man mode, literally cutting off a layer of interaction with other players by removing trading, forcing you to survive this harsh world on your own. And most of the endgame bosses can be soloed. Indeed, when I spoke to Mod Kieran and Elena about the latest raid coming out, I asked specifically if they designed this to be solo possible, and they had. The Elder Scrolls Online has a solo-focused story with fully voice-acted cutscenes and lots of solo instances as you travel to save Tamriel, and the world bosses are possible solo but incredibly tough. Guild Wars 2 is the same, a deep involving story with a vast majority of the game being solo-friendly. And when the
Personal value is reliability, so I know my efforts are still relevant in like 2 years. New games die so fast that I don't feel they are enough reliable enough for me to invest heavily in. That makes perfect sense, yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Seems to do that really well. I think people being able to solo content is cool, but it should be challenging. Yeah, I agree.
grouping does happen, if it happens impromptu,
not everything
it
has
gets
to be
organised
soloable,
behind the
but
scenes,
most
so
of it.
just by being near someone, you're automatically working toward the same goal as them, meaning you can now work together alone. Star Wars The Old Republic is one of the better single-player Star Wars games and Star Wars stories, which just happens to be online. It takes place in an online world with other players. Even the flashpoints, team-based dungeons, will supply you with AI-controlled NPCs to complete them if you don't have a team. Now, I'm not saying these games don't have multiplayer content. Old school RuneScape has Barbarian Assault, a minigame which needs a team. The Elder Scrolls Online has its dungeons. Guild Wars 2 has the PvP battleground.
Like, there's also a difference in that, like, obviously soloable should be soloable as in you can try to do it solo, but it's probably almost impossible, you know? Like, that's what I think. Like if there's a raid that's made for 10 people, being able to, like, at least go inside of the raid solo, like, for example, a Valten or something, and then trying to do it solo is cool. But it shouldn't be designed around just being solo if it's a raid like that, you know? That's what I think, at least.
And the fractals. These games all have content which cannot be completed solo, but this isn't usually early game or story focused. These multiplayer experiences are usually extra, in addition to the main game. Indeed, Star Wars, supplying AI NPCs to accompany solo players through dungeons by fleshing out the team, is a mechanic I've been a big fan of for a long time. Allowing solo players to experience what your game has poured endless hours of design into is a good idea. It's the same reason I really like the henchman system in Guild Wars 1 a lot, but we'll get onto this later. So we can see
I just want a RuneScape but third person, good combat and decent graphics. I mean, that's basically what BDO is. Well, if it wasn't bad, right? Like, BDO did a lot of things right in that regard. You could do all of the life skills, you could do every profession in the game. The combat was good, you couldn't grind monsters for money. Yeah. It did a lot of things right, I think, in that regard, as a sandbox, but it just eventually just got worse and worse, and it got less and less of a sandbox, or it became less and less of a sandbox.
see that modern MMOs are mostly accessible to solo players, with the choice to connect to others if you want to. But let's go back and see how older MMOs handle this. I decided to go back and try and play EverQuest 1 on Steam, the live version, not the Project 99 original. I even streamed the whole thing on YouTube. The VOD is available to go back and watch if you want to. And I'll likely stream more because I actually really enjoyed EverQuest 1. It's janky in places and it's far too convoluted in others. It relies a lot on keyboard shortcuts and typing your interactions and...
You see, like that, I mean, if you think about that in a lot of ways, you could make an MMO out of like a billion different franchises that aren't even isekai related. What a game! How you doing, Wiggles? Look at them pixels. Listen, man, sometimes that's good. Did you play New World now? This is EverQuest. But I mean, think about this, okay? Like, if you had a good fleshed out MMO in any like high fantasy universe, it would probably be pretty good. Like a fully fleshed out Lord of the Rings MMO. There used to be one, but I don't think it was that great. Or fully fleshed out, I don't know, Harry Potter game where you could, you know, or a fully fleshed out A Game of Thrones game. I don't know. I've never watched it. A fully fleshed out Naruto MMO. All of that could technically work. Of the Avatar, possibly the worst MMO. What the hell is Shroud of the Avatar? Playing New World, less cancer now. They're actually quests rather than gather X and kill Y. I watched a little bit, and the first thing I saw were people waiting for mobs to respawn because their quest made you kill some. But I haven't even played yet. What are you watching? This is why do people play MMO solo?
Target enemy is bound to F8 and not tab, and it's hard to click through things, which threw me a little, but all in all, it's
but again, if you haven't watched Grimgar or Made in Abyss or even Sword Art Online to an extent, those are perfect examples of what an MMO could be like. That would really be great, but I mean, it's not happening. Log Horizon, I wasn't the biggest fan of, but that would work too. Has some good aspects, yeah. But Made in Abyss is fucking really disgusting. But if you can bear that, it's really a really good watch.
Very well made game. Now, EverQuest released back in 1999, and it's not only still going, but it's still being actively updated. It's had 28 expansions, with the 29th planned for release in 2023. That is an insanely successful lifespan for an MMORPG. It is testament to the quality of the game that it still has an active player base. Now, EverQuest is often given as an example of an old-school, hardcore MMORPG. It's harsh, it's unforgiving. You need to rely on your team to survive. And I
had no idea that there's new expansions for EverQuest. Wiggles, did you watch Made in Abyss? I think I said that. I told you that before. Why is he holding the cup like that? No one knows. That's just what he does. I love the frog class. Wasn't that just like a race? Yeah, also what happened to races in MMO? Can we talk about that? Like what? All of a sudden, MMOs don't have races anymore. And everyone is just a human. Or something tied to your class. I'm a normie? Then watch Made in Abyss. It's fucking disgusting, but you will love it. Like there's a lot about exploration. Or Grimgar even. Grimgar is really good too. Can destroy noob shitters? Yes.
Is indeed true. EverQuest is a hard game, both in gameplay
complain about wanting that? No, I didn't. I would never. You quit Lost Ark yet? No. But after Belshazzar, which should be in December, I don't know how much longer, how much more motivation I have in me. But I'm probably gonna play it. I will keep going this year. Yeah. You quit? No, I haven't quit. And I probably won't, but I don't know. Like after Belshazzar, who knows?
The meta elements of the game, understanding the UI and navigating all the keyboard shortcuts will take you some time to learn.
Watching.
The thing with EverQuest is there's a lot of downtime between the gameplay moments. As a mage, you need to sit down to recover your mana, and this means as a fighter, you'll be waiting for the mage. There's a lot of moments where nothing is happening, and so you will talk to the players in your group.
I'm not quitting.
When EverQuest was big in 1999 and 2000, you didn't have Netflix. You didn't have a second monitor to watch YouTube on. You would focus entirely on the game, and therefore you would find the fun within the game, which, for the majority of the game, was talking to other people. So when I played EverQuest, I decided to read all the classes, and what really stood out to me was the description of the Necromancer class. In character creation, the class is described as Necromancers are a very self-sufficient class and often choose to adventure alone, though they can provide great value to a group as well. The Necromancer is an excellent choice for the independent player who enjoys a wide variety of abilities. On the EverQuest wiki, the class is described as one of the best soloing classes throughout the game. Now, EverQuest has seen many changes throughout the years. I assumed maybe this was a modern update, but there's a version of the game.
Okay, Wiggles. Okay, I'll give you a reality check. Okay, I was rank 8 in entire Europe. Yeah. Just like I was rank 1 striker in BDO.
Game known as Project 99, which emulates the original experience without any of the quality of life upgrades. And the Project 99 wiki entry for the Necromancer describes it as such, the Necromancer is very independent. Few support classes are able to offer anything that the Necromancer does not already have, and items and gear do not carry the same importance as they do for other classes. The Wiki class highlights section even says, Necromancers are one of the most independent of all classes, being designed with a number of self-only spells that certain other casters can cast on others. Example, self-only invisibility and self-only evacuation, making it a prime choice for those that plan to solo the majority of their careers. However, because of the wide variety of abilities, many not gained until higher levels, a Necromancer must constantly learn new ways to play their class. So even back in 1999, before the popular argument that MMORPGs were becoming too solo-friendly, in the game that many consider one of the grandfathers of the genre, there was a class specifically designed to allow people to adventure alone. When I played Meridian 59, considered the first 3D MMORPG, the opening crypt tutorial section has a door which requires 2 people to open. You must pull 2 levers at the same time. And while it is technically possible to do solo with almost frame-perfect inputs, it's not a required room. It simply leads to an optional boss and some low-level loot. In fact, nothing about Meridian 59 demands you team up to play. How about Guild Wars 1, considered by many to not be an MMORPG, but instead, including by themselves, an online role-playing game? How does this differ? Well, in Guild Wars 1, the world is broken down into maps, both safe or dangerous, and the only times you will see other players in Guild Wars 1 is when you're all in a hub city or a safe outpost. When you travel outside of the city, you'll only ever see yourself or any other players you specifically teamed up with while you were in that safe area. So if you leave town without talking to another player, is the game going to force you to adventure solo? Well, no. There's an NPC henchman system. By the exits of any safe map, you'll find a row of henchmen you can invite to your team, and they'll fight by your side throughout the map, acting as regular players. In fact, once you're a higher level, you can actually turn your own characters into mercenaries, meaning they will now be available as NPC supports when you play on other characters. So you're supported by your own old characters. And it's this lack of open-world player interaction which leads people to describe Guild Wars 1 as an online RPG, not necessarily a massively multiplayer online RPG. Even Final Fantasy XIV is considered an RPG first with an MMO second, meaning it's focused more on the personal journey of the player through its story with multiplayer elements added on, such as the dungeons and the raids, and then the daily roulette allowing you to find a team quickly to receive your reward for playing. But just look at the memes. People say the end game of almost any MMO, including Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2, is fashion. Just chatting in Limsa Lominsa, or trying to turn yourself into a light bulb. Extremely social things to do. Socializing is
turning yourself into a light bulb sounds very social.
Alive and well in many MMOs because the choice is there, while it's also not being forced onto the solo connection player if they don't want to. This means the MM part of the acronym, massively multiplayer, seems to relate to both the player base size and the potential to interact with them in the game world at random, not the social need or demand to party up to experience the majority of the game. Yes, you can form connections with people in online games. You've always been able to. That aspect hasn't gone anywhere. You can still do that. You just don't need to do it as frequently. People often say to me, yes, I know you can still do that, but older games encouraged it, so people did it more. And that might be true, but if people are doing something because they're pushed to do it without a choice, that doesn't necessarily mean they would do it if given the choice. In modern-day MMOs, we see that choice exist more, and more players are choosing to play with smaller, closer-knit groups of friends, or refer to themselves as solo players. A playstyle which has always been on some level supported, but is now much, much more popular. So have MMORPGs become less social? Not really. All of the elements to be social are still there, there's just other stuff to do as well. Unlike the downtime in EverQuest when you would sit down to restore your mana and therefore you had nothing else to do but talk to someone, you now have hundreds of other things to do, both in and out of the game.
MMOs?
Why play an MMORPG solo? Because you want to. At that exact moment, you maybe don't want to interact with people. You maybe don't want to be relied upon to play your role within a team. It doesn't mean that you won't interact with people in the future, or wait till your mates log on and join up with them. It doesn't mean that you won't talk to someone as they cut a tree down or mine a rock next to you. It just means that you have lots of other choices other than being social to distract you. It just means you want to exist within this multiplayer world as a single player for a short time. And there's nothing to stop you from doing that. And if you play an MMO solo, you're not playing it wrong. You're just enjoying your adventure.
No one holds a cup like
your
that?
way.
I don't know.
As for that tweet, I think MMORPGs have always, to some players, been solo-focused online role-playing games that exist within a living world. The massively multiplayer bit was, to several players, more of the potential for social connection and not a demand to do so. And just like the potential was years ago, it's still there, it's just not as novel as it used to be. So people aren't specifically selling the games on the fact you can do that. The social players exist within guilds and clans, discords and forums.
I mean, if you ask anyone in my guild, most people would probably say I am super antisocial, usually.
Still connected, just not chatty within the game itself. Modern MMOs do indeed have more systems that facilitate easier solo play than ever before. But this isn't driving the games to become solo only, it's simply increasing the amount of choice in how you play. There's nothing stopping you teaming up, just like the old days, with a huge group of players and adventuring around together. But unlike the old days, there's now much more choice to not do that, and people are choosing that much more frequently. But how do you play? Are you a solo-only player? Are you social with everyone? Or do you prefer mostly solo play until your mates log on, where you'll team up with them? Let me know in the comments below. Another massive thank you to Guild Wars 2.
I think all they need to do, I'll link the video, all they need to do is make the open world kind of relevant. So there's open world PvP, there's open world like stuff that is not super easy, so teaming up makes sense. So if you're standing in front of a boss that you want to kill, but it's too hard to do solo, you will just ask someone that passes by, yo, you want to help me with that real quick? Or if you're, I don't know, grinding on a spot, or you're doing professions and someone is stealing your shit, you turn on flagging, you kill him, and then he's like, you fucking piece of shit, I'm gonna come with my entire guild. And then he's gonna come with his entire guild, and then you are gonna come with your entire guild, and then it's gonna be a war. That's cool. That creates a community of people that know each other, you know? Friction does. Yeah. Won't happen like in the past? I mean, it did. It did happen last time I played a game like that. That's how video used to be before they kind of ruined it. Before everyone didn't care anymore. Let's me do this before raid bosses. Oh, I know that. I haven't seen the newest season yet. Where someone just stands there and buffs you? You mean? Fighting over, like, that's good. And also dying in the open world should have some sort of penalty that you can't just run back all like permanently. There should be like some, at least like in WoW, where you have to run back to your corpse or something, where you're disconnected from that. You can't insta respawn. That's cringe. XP penalty is usually too much though. You can even kill people without even flagging, but you become red and you die, and our chance you drop your items. I mean, I think whenever you have something that negatively impacts you if you do PvP, that is severe and that sets you back on progression, that's not good, because that just feels bad then. And especially people that aren't doing that aren't actively engaging the PvP because they want to, but because they're getting attacked, it will feel even worse for those, right? I didn't join the discussion. But yeah, that's that video, and we have one more. We have one more that is a similar topic.
Hey guys, it's Lucky here, and today...
Holy fuck, why is it so loud? There were 200 people talking with some devs. I always don't really like to do that too much, because I feel like if the devs don't have their own opinion on things, they're already doing a lot wrong. Right? Like I think that having too much community input is not necessarily good. Obviously it can be, because if the developers have a horrible taste in MMOs and the community says fuck you, we'll do this, then that's a good thing, right? But like having too much community interaction, and that's usually not that great, I think. Because that means they don't have their own direction. Yeah, RuneScape has polls, but the polls are put up by the devs, right? So essentially they came up with something and they want to see how people react to it.
Today we're going to talk about something interesting. I'm making this video because I realized something. Most of us are loners. Most of us don't have someone to play our favorite MMO with.
Polaris metalcore album. Insane album.
It's when we log in every day, but we keep coming back in spite of that. And even if we do have someone to play with,
wait. It's not like you're PvP, but let's say some people are farming and you're spotting, they don't want to PvP because you're stronger, so the only way to force them to leave is just to kill them. Yeah. That should be an option. Smoj? Wait, what happened?
Hey guys, it's Lucky here, and today we're going to talk about something interesting. I'm making this video because I realized something. Most of us are loners. Most of us don't have someone to play our favorite MMO with when we log in every day, but we keep coming back in spite of that. And even if we do have someone to play with, sometimes we just want to play alone. Take a look.
I also don't necessarily agree with that. I think obviously playing MMOs alone and grinding on your own pace and not having to like accommodate someone else is good. That's why I never like, for example, I never like grinding in BDO in a group. I always thought it was fucking weird because I just want to grind at my own pace. I don't want to have anyone, you know, be like affected by my speed. Like if I want to take a break or if I'm gonna go super fast and they can't keep up, that's weird, right? So I always wanted to grind alone in BDO. But at the same time, I also think it's important that you can log in at any point in time and you can just play the game, right? Like that you're not reliant on someone else logging in, that you can log in and play. That's also important. Also, I'm going to play the Edge now. I can't stop it anymore, so I don't have it during the video. Yeah. But I also want to look forward to experience stuff with friends or people. Yeah, I think having both is important. I think having the option to log in and just do your thing and then moving on. And then eventually if someone comes online and you guys are like, oh yeah, you want to do that dungeon we talked about? Sure, you know? But that there should be content in the game that is fundamentally doable solo and optimal solo. That's important too. Because if it's not optimal solo, then you are always looking for a group, right? That you can't just group up and it is more efficient that way, you know? Family makes food, make food. I'm a chicken. I'ma make a chicken. If you are limited gated by other people's presence, then then you will quit once the person is, yeah, for example, right? Like if you start a new expansion of something and you've started with someone and then all of a sudden that person is like, yeah, it's not really my style. Then, you know, then what do you do? Like, I think it's always good to have the fundamental gameplay be soloable and mostly optimal solo as well. And then there's some parts that are optimal in groups, right? But not everything.
Look at Asmongold, who started his YouTube channel 8 years ago, teaching people how to solo group content.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Asmongold. I'm going to show y'all how to solo Conclave of Wind. What's up, y'all? It's your boy Asmongold, and today we're continuing the series on how to solo Glory of the Cataclysm Hero. What's up, y'all? It's your boy Asmongold, and today I'm going to show y'all how to solo Whisper Sword as a warrior.
And even those of us that do have friends have a hard time agreeing with those friends on what MMO to play and when, resulting on the people that do have friends also playing MMOs alone. This was made more apparent than ever when I tossed up a video on YouTube about MMOs that you can play alone or without friends, and it absolutely blew up. You guys devoured this thing, shedding some light on the fact that, hey, a lot of us spend most of our time playing MMOs solo, and we recognize that. MMORPGs are more and more turning into RPGs that happen to be online. Is it the developers implementing it, or is it us demanding it? Why is it that
we just had that topic? That's not what's happening at all.
Most players today log into their massively multiplayer game and spend the majority of their time playing alone? These are all interesting questions, but perhaps the most interesting question of all is it ruining the genre? Is the fact that MMOs are becoming more and more of a solo experience contributing to the decline of the genre? I'm gonna try to answer all of those questions today. In the early days of the MMO genre, you needed a group for just about everything, and even if you could solo something, getting a group was generally a lot faster and more efficient. If you played an MMO back in the early 2000s, you probably had a pretty tight-knit circle, or at least a guild that you spent a lot of time with. You probably even remember a lot of those players today. They were people that became not just online acquaintances, but actual friends that you logged into the game for and grouped up with and ran through content together. It was just part of the game, and it was just what you did. And if you didn't, well, you wouldn't be getting a whole lot done, and you'd probably quit. Except players didn't quit. MMOs were never more popular than they were when they were forcing introverts to join guilds and get things done. When MMOs were hard instead of easy.
Any of that. I don't know why this is like a... They didn't force you to be in any... Like, I played WoW for like 4 years before joining my first guild. I joined my first guild in Wrath of the Lich King because I wanted to go raiding finally. But outside of that, you don't need you didn't need any of that shit. You could do whatever the fuck you want. And even for raiding, you didn't need a guild. You just need to find a group, right? I don't think, like, back in the day, it made it like the open world was more relevant, so people grouped up more, and there was less. The content was harder in general, comparatively to the player skill, at least. So therefore, people grouped up, right? The content was more challenging, as like the mob camps were too like very tight. So just pulling one mob would result in pulling another mob and then another one, and you would die. So like having someone with you that was always easier, right? And lack of information too. But like that the world was more difficult, the open world, that made you team up because that one quest was faster that way. Yeah, and
but today the most popular MMOs seem to be designed around the player that is not interested in joining guilds, around the player that doesn't want a challenge in their questing experience. Dungeon finders, raid finders, not to mention the fastest way to level is usually what? It's the main story quest, which is almost entirely a solo experience carved straight through the MMO. I mean, we are at a point now where it's often less productive and less efficient to play our massively multiplayer games with other players. Grouping up used to be the fastest way to level, if not the only way to level. Battles were difficult, and it wasn't uncommon for there to be significant penalties for dying. You were all in it together. You actually needed each other, and every role in the group was incredibly important as a result. There was always a lot on the line, creating a lot of moments to bond with the players around you. If you survived that sketchy pull or managed to take the boss down, you'd celebrate. I still remember waiting for high-level healers to come res me in games like Lineage 2 to get hours of my experience back when we had died and lost it on death. I also remember actually having to use crowd control abilities to survive when someone in the group tab targeted the wrong enemy by accident.
I miscalculated.
Everyone needed to be present and give it their all. But not just that, there was an incentive to bond with those players. There was an incentive to perform at your best. If you had a tank with clean pulls that could maintain aggro, or a healer that kept everyone standing, that was special. You remembered those players. You added them as friends, because that's the only way you would make sure you had a group to do that stuff with the next day. There wasn't a dungeon finder that you could queue into while watching Netflix
Dungeon
and YouTube.
Finder only works because the content is piss easy. That's why most people don't matchmake, I don't know, Clown, because that shit is hard as shit. Fuck. And if you matchmake that, you'll probably just you can barely do the first one. The reason why dungeon finders are a thing is not because they want you to funnel you into the solo content. It's just because they don't care about challenging content anymore, and they want players to just, you know, soak in their game without thinking about it.
You had to be social and you had to try. But don't get me wrong, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. If you think Tinder is hard on average looking nerds today, you should try being an average damage dealing DPS in the early 2000s. When tanks and healers logged into the game, they got swiped right on more than supermodels on Tinder. They were instantly messaged by desperate damage dealers begging for a group so they could actually leave town. But just like on Tinder, those tanks and healers swiped left on almost all those requests. They were already spoken for. They had already fallen into a static group. Desperate damage dealers had already locked them down. It was the best time to be a tank and a healer, and probably
there's no desire to pick up more skillful players. Like most people also matchmake guardians, for example, and they get annoyed if the people don't use pheromones and everything, but they still do it because it's easier and there's no reason to like have someone good in the group. It just makes it a little bit faster. Like the most frustrating part in raids is if you fail the raid and you can't complete it, right? And back in the day, if you did a dungeon where you needed like an hour to even get a group together, right? And you went into the dungeon and then the fucking healer didn't even know what his abilities are and he just used damage abilities. You're like, holy fuck, I'm never gonna take this fucking piece of shit to my dungeon anymore because I can't even complete the dungeon because he doesn't know how the game works, right? Or whatever. Like, of course, like, if the content is piss easy, then there's no reason to even think about, oh, this guy was really good, I'm gonna ask him again next time or whatever, right? There's no point. So that's why statics start forming in Legion raids and not fucking T2 Guardians. Yeah. Because the actual progress, like most of the games nowadays are piss easy besides endgame. And that's why I think we should just get rid of endgame entirely. No endgame.
The worst time to be a damage dealer. But man, when you found that
everything is endgame, you know? And there's continuous progression from the get-go.
Like a group that you look forward to logging in with and playing with every day. It was special. You'd shoot the breeze in comms while grinding through a dungeon until late in the night, knowing you'd all log back in the next day and maybe try out that new leveling spot or that new dungeon that you were all finally high enough level to do. But on the flip side, while some players were in that group making those memories, there were plenty of other players signing in just to realize they weren't going to get a group in time for it.
How do you think you play when there is no end game and everything is end game? That means everything is something you want to push towards. That new dungeon that you can do at level 20, oh shit, I want to push for that. Oh, I'm getting a new ability at level 22, oh shit, I'm gonna push for that. I wonder what that is. Oh shit, level 23 unlocks, I can go to this new zone finally that I walked past before where the mobs were way too hard. When I was level 10, maybe I'll check that out at level 23. That sounds fun, right? Escalate at some point? I don't think so. I think you can have that permanently. You just need to have the game to be intricate and challenging enough from the get-go that it lasts way longer. Like, of course, like going through all the continents in Lost Ark and tier 1 and tier 2 was super fast. And there was so much ground that you covered, so many different dungeons that you did. And all of that was so piss easy. There was no progression whatsoever. Every mob was just a target dummy. And all of that content is basically wasted. All of the effort the developers put into all of that content is fucking wasted. It's just thrown out of the window. So if you have content where, for example, in a WoW example, you start in Elven Forest and you will be in Elven Forest for a fucking week before you get out of there. But it's not boring and repetitive a week, but it's like, oh shit, this is really cool. I want to explore that a little bit. Just doing life skills low level is interesting and you can progress that. And you know, all of that needs to work together, obviously, for it to work. Of course, if you're in Lost Ark, if you're in the first city for a week, you will quit the game because it's boring as shit, right? So you need to design the entire game around content being relevant from the get-go and everything feeling like there's a step forward, you know? Yeah, but your priority is still pushing max levels. You can start doing great fun raids, and that's why you should have great fun dungeons and shit to do on level fucking 2. Not level 50 only. Lost Ark doesn't start until you're 1370 item level. Of course you want to push to that, because there's literally nothing else before, right? There's literally just, everything is just a pushover.
To be worth it, and they sign back out again after trying for sometimes hours. In other words, players were spending as much time looking for a group as they were being in a group. I remember standing in town looking for groups in
a proper old school leveling experience, or like how it felt back in the day, that lasts for the entirety of your experience. So it always feels like you're on a great adventure that feels new and refreshing. There's no repetition in the same way, you know? There's some things that you have to do for 3 weeks and then new content releases.
In Lineage 2 or in Juno in Final Fantasy 11. I was a DPS in both games, and there were a lot of nights where I didn't get a group because I signed on too late due to school or work or life. And while I miss the camaraderie that came with forcing everyone to play together all the time, I don't miss that part of it. And even if you were one of the lucky ones that managed to form a static group, it only lasted so long. One person would level too fast, or one would level too slow, or one would go full Leroy
MMOs
Jenkins.
aren't designed like that anymore.
And your odds of playing together the next day weren't great. But I'd take those odds right now because at the moment, indicators are suggesting that a recession is on the way, which brings me to the sponsor of today's video, Masterworks. Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, said that what's coming could be worse than a recession. So what are experts doing to prepare? They're following recently released guidance from BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, who says that a normal portfolio of stocks and bonds won't cut it anymore. For 2022 and beyond, BlackRock recommends diversifying with alternative assets. And of all the alternatives out there, only one was personally recommended by BlackRock CEO Larry Fink: contemporary art. Probably because contemporary art has outpaced the S&P 500 for the last 25 years by more than double, and it appreciates more than gold, real estate, and the S&P when inflation is high, at a whopping 33% annually, repeating of course. That's why I've partnered with Masterworks, because they're helping you secure your financial future by offering investments in the same contemporary art. This is not NFTs, this is fractional shares of actual paintings by legends like Picasso and Banksy. When Masterworks sells the paintings that you are invested in, you get a potential return. And the 6 paintings that they've sold so far have averaged a 29% net annual return, even through COVID, a bear market, and record high inflation. Now, of course, past performance is no guarantee of future results, but I think this is absolutely an option to consider when diversifying your portfolio. With inflation still crazy high and stocks still crazy low, Masterworks is seeing a record demand. But you can skip the waitlist by clicking the link down in the description below. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to it. Okay, so like I was saying, it's nearly impossible for a group of people to sync their lives together in a way that would allow them to progress through an MMO at the exact same speed. And even if you did have a static group and you were committed to staying in that static group, there would be days where you couldn't play because that meant you would outlevel the people in the group. And there's the rub. That's the reason that MMOs focused on having a solid single player experience began their rise to dominance. If the MMO had a fleshed out enough solo experience, you always had something to do.
I soloed everything in old school MMOs most of the time. That's always been like that. Like, I have no idea where this notion comes from. Oh my god, everything is so solo centric now. It's just that content is fucking piss easy until you get to challenging one, so it doesn't matter if you have a group or not. Open world doesn't matter either, so you don't need a guild to protect you or help you with shit. So it's like, it's just more efficient to do it solo. That's the only difference. It's always been like that though.
If your friends weren't on, or if you didn't have any to begin with, you could still make great progress in the game. And this was a welcome change. And more than ever before, we're seeing MMOs focus on the solo experience all the way from early on in their development. Here's a clip from the recent Ashes of Creation developer update.
Ashes of Creation is looking to fulfill both that solo-oriented mind in gameplay, as well as the group and social experience.
WoW kind of started this, in my opinion. It had a very casual questing experience that would take you all the way through most of the game, but initially it lacked the Dungeon Finder. Later on, toward the end of the Wrath of the Lich King expansion, the Dungeon Finder was finally added. No longer were we walking to dungeons and forming groups in zone chat. We are now queued into an instance and tossed into a group that may or may not acknowledge each other's existence in group chat. We successfully got rid of boring hours of standing around looking for a group, but we also successfully got rid of a ton of social interaction in the process. You don't need to make friends. You
and again, Dungeon Finder only works because the content is so easy.
Dungeon when you want to, on your schedule. It didn't matter if you were great at the game or bad at it, you'd get tossed into a group all the same. There was a lot less social accountability. One inevitable downside to this, dungeon content began to be designed for these types of groups. Random groups of strangers were more prone to giving up on a group as soon as it was apparent it wasn't going to be a smooth dungeon experience. They knew they could simply queue up for a dungeon group later, and as a result, commitment to the group was lacking, and you couldn't have content as difficult as you used to. People just wouldn't stick around through the wipes. The solution was to make dungeon content easier. When's the last time you used a CC ability on an ad? No way. You pull that bad boy in and melt it down with everything else. Relying on players to CC mobs was tedious. It required communication. Cleaving it all down was easy. Everyone could be on the same page without even having to talk to each other. And I see this in almost every MMO. Dungeons are generally pretty easy. They generally don't require a lot of communication, and as a result, they often end up being pretty forgettable. You romp through it, you melt everything inside, and then you forget the people and the content that you experience experience. It'd now be fair to describe most MMORPGs as single-player games with some group content tacked onto the side. All of the biggest MMOs like Final Fantasy XIV, ESO, Guild Wars 2, World of Warcraft, they've all got tons and tons of solo content for you to do when you log in. Oftentimes, they have way more solo content than they do group content, and they've succeeded all the more for it. Players have spoken silently and with their wallets. They gravitate towards the MMOs with a fleshed out solo experience. They want the option to group up on their schedule and not somebody else's, and sometimes they want the option to not have to group up at all. So this begs the question, why play MMOs at all if you're the person that doesn't want to interact with anyone at all? And it's a fair question, but I think it's the fact that MMOs are an unending story. They're not just about interacting with other people. They are about the journey, the days, the weeks, the months that we put into them. They'll be relevant for years. It always feels bad when you're watching a good show and you go to put on the next season only to find out there isn't one. The show got canceled years ago. Or maybe this calls for a more direct comparison, such as when you're enjoying a single player game and you have an epic fight and you get that bittersweet feeling because you know a final battle when you see one. It's epic, it gives closure, and you're completely aware of the fact that you're likely only a few lines of dialogue and maybe a cutscene away from putting the game down forever. The character you're leveling up, the skills you unlock, the cool cosmetics you found, you'll never see them again, nor will anyone else. You beat the game and you'll probably never boot it up. It's a conflicting moment of wow, that was amazing, and damn, it's over. And that's where MMORPGs come in. They don't end, or at least you hope they won't anytime soon. You don't have to walk away from the story and the character and the hero you leveled. You'll be jumping back onto it in the next expansion. There's also the fact that playing alone isn't always a conscious choice. It's not always a decision made through social anxiety. Sometimes it just happens that way. I don't consider myself a solo MMO player, but if I look back at my recent experiences in MMOs, I have a lot of time spent playing solo. It wasn't even a conscious decision I made, but my schedule fell out of sync with the people I tended to group with. I played the MMO for half the day and then maybe went to work on a YouTube video. The next day, they were levels ahead of me and it didn't make sense to group. Or on the flip side, I'd be the one degenning the MMO the way we MMO players sometimes do, and someone in the group would have work, a new girlfriend, a new kid, or school, and they'd fall out of sync. And there's one critical problem that
And that's, I mean, the falling out of sync part makes sense. I think that's why I said, like, I think it's important that games feel good solo too, right? This guy clearly hasn't pushed high mythic plus and 45. We were bursting while I was in the option. You have interrupt that motherfucker because M70 and 45. That mob didn't give a fuck about your damage. Yeah, once you have, again, I mean, this comes back to the same thing. Once you have difficulty, you need to communicate. And if the rewards that's also an important part of this. Like, just having challenging content will just frustrate people, right? Because people want to go do their daily heroics, right? They want to do their daily heroic dungeon and they want to just get it over with, and the reward is minimal, but they still want to do it anyways, right? If you make that content super challenging, then it's gonna just be frustrating. But if you make content challenging that the reward behind it is then good and feels satisfying, then that entire system works, you know? Because then it feels like, oh yeah, I mean, this was kind of tedious to do, this was pretty hard, but it was worth it, you know?
That's arisen with the new progression rates of MMOs today. Even though you're only a day or two behind your friends, you might as well be on a different server while you're leveling up. They're working on different dungeons, different zones, and they're grabbing different materials, and while of course completing completely different quests. Fortunately, once you hit max level, that problem mostly tends to fade away, but you have to get to max level first, and so few players do these days. Look at New Worlds, look at Lost Ark. This is why it's so critical for games to have a solo-friendly leveling.
Because the leveling in those games is dog shit. That's why they don't reach it. Not because it's anything else. It's just horrible.
Experience. As much as we all dream of jumping into an MMO with our friends and leveling through the whole thing together, life just gets in the way. Most of us have either school, jobs, significant others, or a family, or some combination of the four that require varying amounts of our time. So let's circle back to the question at the beginning of the video. MMOs were more popular than ever when they forced us to play together, when they lacked dungeon finders and raid finders. But these days, MMOs are often built with the solo player at the forefront of their design. Do MMOs attract fewer players because of this change? Or do MMOs...
They're not designed around the solo player. They're designed around Jimmy, who doesn't want to think about anything, and he just wants to log in for 20 minutes and just wants to do a chaos dungeon. Or he wants to level and does a dungeon and not think about anything and just roll his fucking head across the keyboard and kill everything. That's what they're. That has nothing to do with solo or not.
Attract fewer players because we changed. Whilst population peaked at around 12 million current subscribers all the way back in 2010, it's been on the decline since, and no other MMO has even come close to reaching its concurrent player base. Why is that? Is it due to switching the focus to the solo experience? I don't think so. The most successful MMOs today have the best solo content. I think we changed, so the MMOs had to follow suit. We were once okay with standing in town for an hour looking for a group. It was all new and shiny. This whole
would still be okay with that if the content we were queuing up with for wouldn't be trash and wouldn't be just a pushover and boring and like a chore, right? We would still be fine with that if it was still an experience.
Going online and grouping with people from around the world, most players had never really experienced that before, but the novelty wore off. The excitement of being able to log into a game and play it with other people wasn't new anymore and no longer outweighed the disappointment of standing in town looking for a group. And not only that, every week new online games were popping up that could also satisfy that same.
Imagine this, okay? Whenever you need to clean the dishes, you first have to get 5 people together randomly on the street that will help you. Of course you're not gonna enjoy that. Of course you're gonna say, what the fuck, I wish I could just do this solo real quick, man. I just get it over with, you know? Get it out. Of course you don't want to fucking have to prepare and everything. You're just gonna do it real quick, get it over with, you know, you don't have to think about it anymore. And that's the thing, the most content in MMOs nowadays is just a fucking chore. But you kind of have to do it because then you will, if you don't do it, you will fall behind. So what you want to do is, you want to just get it done quickly, don't have to think about it, just get it over with. And then you're done. That's why I say Lost Ark dailies are toilet cleaning. No one is looking forward to that. Their rewards are minuscule, right? But you still need to do them. So it doesn't feel particularly rewarding. It doesn't feel particularly fun either. And it definitely isn't challenging. But if it was challenging, it would be fucking obnoxious, right? Because there's no payoff, then no one would do it. Right? Like that's the thing.
Online desire. The only difference is they had you in a match in 5 minutes. Today, being subjected to an hour-long wait in town, trying to form a party in zone chat is a quit moment for most players.
No,
there's too many other options now, too many other multiplayer games that will have you in a match in an instant. Some say MMOs are dead as a result, and I don't agree with that. Recent MMO launches have been insane. There are still millions of players looking for and hoping for an MMO to grab them the way that the genre once did. You saw it twice in the last year, with millions showing up for the launches of New World and Lost Ark. Neither of those games held on to all of their players, but there were a lot of reasons for that prevent those games from being indicators of a dead genre. Lost Ark's pay-to-win nature ensures that it will only ever see limited success here in the West, despite actually being a solid game. And New World, it came out of the oven half-baked. It wasn't finished, but it's now making the same pivot the rest of the major MMOs did after their launches. It's hard focusing on that solo experience. It's completely revamped and fleshed out its questing experience so that you can follow a main quest chain all the way through the game. It also added a dungeon finder. It's realized that these are the things that most MMO players crave these days.
I can't watch this video anymore. No, that's not at all. That's why no one plays these games long term. They're not craving that. They're just going through it because it's easy. That's why they're key. That's what people crave. Like what? It's easy. But the content itself is shit and is not rewarding enough. So obviously people want it to be easy so they can still bear with it. That's all there is.
Is all of this working for New World? In anticipation of all this new content, combined with its new zone and new weapon, its player base is up 40% in the last 30 days. Wait, scratch that. I just refreshed the page. Make that 46% in the last 30 days. Looks like their focus on the players without friends is starting.
No. Okay, I'm gonna link the video anyways. So I like both. Josh had a little bit better of an approach. Why this is increasing is because a new expansion coming with a lot of new content. People get hyped for it. It will just decrease again, just like before. There's no, I mean, it is what it is. And also, obviously, there's no other MMOs currently, so people are like, oh, you know. So there is something new coming. Let's check it out, and then it will just go down again. But like in general, just to sum it up, it's just not the content isn't fun or rewarding enough to warrant it being challenging. And that's why everyone plays it solo, because you don't need to find a group for easy content. So you just go through it solo, you get your shit, and you get out again. That's why everything is solo centric, which it isn't really, right? But it's just the developers value people sticking to it more. What the fuck just... The developers want players to be in the game for longer hours without thinking about it, and just, you know, without engaging with it a lot. And then there's content that is super challenging at the end game, which most people don't even reach because they just care about the initial, like, player influx. So it looks good for investors or whatever, which is obviously just a guess, but yeah.